Hi, my name's Hamish Sewell and I'm coming to you today from the Stories from the Red Couch Studios here in Palmwoods on the Sunshine Coast. Before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where we're here at the moment. It's the Cubby Cubby people, and further to the south it's the Jinnabara, and to the elders past, present and emerging. So today we're talking locative apps, and as the primary producer and the founder of the app Soundtrails, over the last 8 years I've been fascinated by the way in which audio is increasingly bringing to life the place, the stories, the memories, the whispers even of the world around us. And I would even argue that as we move towards a spatialized AR tracked experience, that audio is going to play one of the most key roles in the immersive audio experience. So joining me today from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and speaking to this and talking about his fantastic app, Roundware, is Halsey Burgund. Halsey is a fellow at the documentary lab, Open Documentary Lab at MIT, and he describes himself as a sound artist and technologist. So, hi, Halsey.
Hello, it's great to be here, Hamish. Thank you so much for having me.
Halsey, before we get to Roundware, I'd like to ask you to unpack the expression contributory location-based audio. Contributory location-based audio. It's quite a mouthful, but I think that's really underpins this whole business of what we're talking about today.
Yeah, it is a bit of a mouthful, and I apologize for forcing you to say it out loud. But it does include some core components, I think, about the work that I do specifically with the Ramware platform that you referred to. Location-based, I think, is fairly perhaps, well, I think both parts of it are fairly self-explanatory, but the location-based part of the audio experience is, as you were saying, the ability to overlay audio on any physical space to augment the experience of a person, an individual, or a group of people who are inhabiting that space. You obviously have the real live audio of that's generated in real time, in our real world, and then augmenting that with a, curated, semi-curated stream of audio that changes based on where the listener is located is something that fascinates me for lots of reasons that I'm sure we'll get into as we go along. So that's the sort of location-based audio bit, and the contributory part. For me, it's always been, I've always gotten massive amounts of inspiration from, talking to other people, interviewing other people, chatting about different topics that interest me, and hearing their reactions to a whole variety of topics. And, I take that sort of outside influence as inspiration. And I 12 years ago or 15 years ago, whenever I started Roundware, I was really excited about creating location-based audio where people, other than myself, were allowed to insert themselves into the landscape through audio. So it's kind of like graffiti tagging of the side of a building, except it's a non-destructive sort of audio tagging of a place. So you can leave your memories of a place, leave your experiences, and then future people who come to that same place can hear not just what me as the creator of the experience thought was useful and interesting about that spot, but these personal stories of individuals who can, join in this sort of chorus of previous human experience in a certain location and sort of connect the past with the present and connect one person to another and all of these things. So my interest in being able to not just have a single perspective, have a multiplicity of perspectives sort of sprinkled throughout a landscape is something that Roundware is effectively designed to do. So hence the mouthful of a phrase, but hopefully that was a bit helpful on explaining where I'm coming from.
Yeah. So this is a very different model than, say, something like Soundtrails, which is really building immersive stories on location and allows people to walk in and out of those stories to really get a sense of the world around them. This is a different model here. This is actually saying that while you're walking through something which might be curated, it's also allowing people to then upload their own excerpts, their own anecdotes, their own sort of reflections into that mix. I guess one of the difficulties here is how you actually curate something like this so that it actually works as a choreographed or a sort of a well-engineered experience that's not just kind of scattergunned. How do we sort of approach this with Roundware?
Yeah, so you hit on something that I think about a lot. Clearly, it's the choreography is something that remains flexible in the sense that I never know, as the creator of this, what exactly an experience somebody will have. And that's determined both by what you point out, in the sense that individuals who are participating in the project can make their own comments and leave those wherever they choose. But it's also determined, of course, by something that all of these apps have in common, which is that the person doing the walking and listening, you can't tell them exactly where to go. You can't tell them how fast to walk or what, you can try to tell them that, but you can't guarantee that they're going to do that. So there's this sort of indeterminacy of sorts, no matter what, based on both where people are walking, and in my case, in the Roundware case, also what kinds of content get put into the mix. So that, of course, creates a semi-fraught experience for me as a creator in sort of not knowing exactly what's going to happen. And, there are large parts of my personality that are sort of desirous of control, and this goes against that. And it is definitely nerve-wracking. I mean, I've done pieces where on day one, there's nothing, when it opens, there's nothing in the landscape except for a musical composition that exists, which is nice, but the musical composition is supposed to have voices on top of it. So it's not very interesting in and of itself. And you open it up on day one and it's like, no, nothing's there. So, you have to let it mature and let it evolve and sort of have trust and faith that the public will jump in a way that, that is respectful. And that to me is the key approach, is sort of trying to create an environment where there's a desire to be respectful and to be a part of something rather than, ruin something, rather than tear something down. And that's something that is really hard to do, and I by no means achieve that all the time, but it is something that that I try by asking questions that I think are inviting, by encouraging, sort of sometimes I seed the environment with the types of comments that I want, that are casual and not requiring lots of expertise or anything, and the one very important part of this, which I think your question hits on, is this approach of post-moderation, which I take. And that, what I mean by post-moderation, is when people make a comment, I have made the decision to allow that comment into the piece right away without any kind of intervention of a human being. Just the system just puts it right in there. And that I do that because I want to tell my audience, I want to say, hey, I trust you to do something that's respectful, as I was saying, and something that will be, a positive contribution to the piece. And you don't have to jump through lots of hoops to get there. And I hope that encourages people to be respectful. But, sometimes, people aren't, and I want to have the ability to take things out or whatever, then I can do that later. But I really feel that it's important to do that. And the risk I take with that, of course, is that sometimes if somebody does make a comment, leave a recording that somehow I think is detrimental to the overall experience of most users, then I take it out. But until I take it out, it exists in there, and that's a risk that I have to take. But for me, it's a pretty easy approach or it's an easy decision, I should say, because I don't want to, to me, it's very, I hate things where it's like you toss feedback like over you're like tossing feedback over some big wall, and you have no idea what's going on the other side, and then you sculpt your feedback. Of course, in this case, you sculpt your audio recording in hopes that someone will approve it, and then you think about what they want to hear, and then you start saying not what you really feel, but what you think somebody else wants to hear, and then it all sort of goes downhill, in my opinion, from there. So that's the balance that I have to walk with these things.
So there's really some really interesting questions here, I think, with locative audio around the whole, what we might call democratization of space, and the way in which, something like, for instance, I would assume I could make the argument with Soundtrails that by bringing to life those voices, those stories, those whispers, those collective memories in the world around us, there's something very powerful about sort of peeling back those traditional layers of what's sanctioned, what's allowed, the monuments, the acknowledged kind of narratives. But I think you're talking about a slightly different process here of the democratization. You're talking about the process of the users themselves as they walk through these spaces being able to sort of upload and add their own memories. And I guess key to that is the foundation that you built Roundware upon, which is this kind of whole principle of listen and speak. And that's a very interesting proposition for me, because it's a very simple sort of apparatus to build, and yet taking that platform, taking that proposition, the listen and the speak proposition, you've then crafted that into a range of projects. And I guess I'm kind of curious as to when you take that project, because if I download the Roundware app and I add something in, I speak something, and then in turn I can kind of go and listen to my voice there as part of a sound bed in the area that I am. How do you then kind of move from that initial sort of structure, and then how do you build that into something which is more focused, more project focused? And maybe you could give us some examples.
Sure. Yeah. So the Ramware app that you're referring to is really a demonstration app of sorts, in the sense that it is intended to sort of highlight the functionality of Ramware as a platform and the experience that one can create or can have with the platform, rather than it being an actual project, as you say, an actual artwork, or a project related to an institution or organization or something like that. So there's a distinction that I want to make there. But in any case, there's as you say, it's listen and speak. And just a quick point on that is that, almost all of my apps that use Ramware do sort of have a homepage, which, as you said, just sort of starts with listen and speak. And I don't preference one or the other. I actually have them. I mean, there's a slight preference, because usually one is above the other just on the screen, but they're both the same size. It's not like you come to the app and it's like, here's listening, and then down in the corner you can click to speak. It's very much about sort of both, and it's this sort of cyclical thing that I think is ideally the experience people will get. That said, obviously it's much easier or lower lift for people to just do the listening rather than contributing, and I get that, and that's fine. People usually press listen first, I think. But in any case, that's a sort of equality of those two things that goes along with the democratization that you're referring to. But as far as turning something like the Roundware demonstration app into a project and what the differences are there, I think the key, there's several keys from my perspective. First of all, the underlying ambient sound layer, which is sort of continuous audio that sort of goes on beneath these voices. I kind of think of it as the ambient layer as sort of this ocean of sound that's happening and changing as you walk around, and then the voices that come in as you sort of wander by them are kind of like fish or this part of a coral reef or something like that you're kind of wandering by, and they sort of temporarily come up. You can hear them fading in and then fading out, and they kind of sort of come in and out of this sort of ocean environment, if you will. And that environment is often the first place one of the first places I start when creating a new project. I think about what sort of aural environment I want to create, and how I want that to change based on the landscape that I'm working with. If I'm working with a small park, that's one thing. If I'm working with an entire city, that's another thing. An entire country, that's another thing. There's so many different ways that this could happen, and it's important to me to sort of think about how I want this to how I want this layer to pan out. So I'll give an example of a project I did a few years ago in the southern part of Massachusetts in the U.S. A project at a cranberry bog there, which was undergoing a process of being decommissioned. It was being turned from a cranberry bog, which is a very sort of rigorous agricultural purpose, to grow cranberries as efficiently as possible to make a business out of it. It was being turned from that back into a more natural state in order to sort of return the geomorphology to where it was, and to do some environmental work to sort of improve the overall environmental situation there. And so for the audio that I overlaid on top of that, I overlaid audio of a certain type on top of the channels, the very rigorous sort of grid-like channels that made the cranberry bog initially. And then I overlaid a different kind of audio on top of the very sinuous, sort of curvy types of channels that were dug. They were man-made in the sense that they were dug and highly designed by the people doing this work, but nonetheless they were intended to be more natural in the sense of flowing with the landscape, not flowing sort of against the landscape as agriculture often does. So I had these sort of two competing geomorphologies of the land, and I chose to use those as a sort of substrate for applying different types of audio, of music on top of them, and then I just kind of built things from there. And then the voices, of course, are sort of populated within that infrastructure. So that's one thing I do. And then the second really big thing I do for sort of customizing for a project is think really long and hard about what prompts I want to give to the participants, what questions I want to ask them, what topics are of interest, and what topics I think will work well with the concept of the piece. And usually there's a handful of anywhere from 2 to sort of 5 different prompts that people can choose from, and I try to have some that are broad based, so you don't have to. So you can almost say whatever you want, but then have some quite specific too, for in those instances where folks need a little more specific inspiration to jump in. So I think a lot about those questions about the ordering.
Can I just interrupt here? Because when you're talking about prompts, I just want to focus on something like the Corona Diaries, which is an initiative I think that where the Neiman Group has used the Roundware platform as a way to initiate a series of recordings from people all around the world, and the prompts that you're using, I think there is something like "What's going on for you at the moment?" or "Where are you?" Was that correct? Have I got that right?
We've had a series. We've actually had a series of prompts in this project that have, and I can't even remember exactly what is up there now, sadly. But we've had a series of prompts, and some of them were pretty broad like that. We did have some prompts that were related to going back to school. Now is the sort of a going back to school time. We had ones at earlier in the summer, the U.S. summer, a couple months ago about, what are your summer plans? There's no camps for kids. What's changing up then? So we tried to kind of keep things present in that sense and sort of contemporary. And we did work with a number of publications. The Neiman Foundation is a journalism foundation, and it's, as such, we were largely focused on sort of working with publications to gather material that they could use in their own podcast or other, broadcast material from them. So we did do some work there. So yeah, there was it's often a series of, it's often a sort of trying prompts, seeing what responses you get, and then changing them if you want. Yeah. Ramware does have a facility to quite easily change what you're asking, either the phrasing of it or change questions completely, because I know that I can't predict this stuff ahead of time.
Yeah. So maybe now is a good time, Halsey, for you to give us a bit of a glimpse into the back end of the Roundware platform and to see what sort of facilities, what sort of functions we've got, how it looks, how someone like a producer would approach Roundware and look at, laying in audio, and how they might think about the whole choreographing of a project like what you've been working on.
Sure. So I'm not really, I think there's a lot of places that I could start here. I hope my screen is shared now. My Zoom stuff is getting in the way.
Yep, we're seeing it. We're seeing it. Yep.
All right, good. So I can just, here is the sort of homepage of Ramware. There's a lot of information here, and about what it is. I should say it's an open source project. So just to make that clear, there are Roundwares on GitHub, and there's server code and frameworks for iOS and the web, and some Android stuff, but primarily iOS and the web. And people can feel free to grab that and do what they want. But I can take you into perhaps the most interesting thing from a sort of how to construct and how to use and what the abilities are would be to look at the Ramware Admin, which is, I apologize, not the most pretty of things, but it does, it does perform the functions that I need, and yeah. So basically, Ramware is a website connecting to the server, and this is where all the data is kept. The data, obviously, of the sound recordings that are used to construct these sort of sound audio experiences, but then also a whole bunch of data which is used to construct and sort of define what the experience is. So I could actually go to the one that I was just referring to, the project I was referring to. These are all different projects. So the one I was referring to about the Cranberry Bog is called Bog People. And you can see there's a bunch of, I'm not going to go through all these because this will bore people to death, but there's some basic information about the location of the overall project, the title, what functions are available, how long people can make recordings for. I don't let people record forever because that can get pretty boring. And just a bunch of other sort of high-level project information. The tags are often what questions I ask. Things like describe how this location has changed, share a memory of this related to this location. These are the tags, the prompts that I ask people to respond to. And then there's the ability to sort of build what the UI looks like, different tiering of questions and whatnot, which can be done. And then as far as the two primary pieces of data that I use to sort of construct the audio and how the audio is algorithmically built are called audio tracks and speakers. And I referred to the speaker stuff before when I was talking about the different types of channels in the Cranberry Bog, the old ones and the new ones. And you can see, that's not the one I want. Sorry, let me get to, here we go. So you can see here, each of these colored shapes is sorry, the map takes a second to fill in. Each of these colored shapes is a region in which a certain piece of audio is playing. And when two of them overlap each other, then you get overlapping audio. The inner shape here and the outer shape define an attenuation border. So at the inside, it's at the maximum volume that you allow, and at the outside, it's at the minimum, which is typically 0. And in this way, you can kind of overlap these regions and assign different pieces of audio to each one, such that you create, a sort of evolving audio landscape as people walk around. In this case, you can see some of the more straight ones, these are these sort of old channels that were built to grow cranberries, and then you can see these very sinuous, crazy kind of new shapes that were formed by some of the changes that were done. You can see here there's like a right angle, a couple right angles that's obviously very unnatural. That was something that was done for growing, for farming, and now that's been taken over by this other sort of approach. So this is this is kind of the underlying ambient music layer, if you will. In this case, I chose to have a layer of audio that sort of undergirds the whole thing. It's very, very simple, but it's kind of a very, very elemental layer underneath all of these, as much as you want in any given spot. So that's kind of the speakers, and then the other audio is defined, the behavior of the sort of momentary bits of audio, if you will, the fish / coral / kelp that you swim by in your oceanic audio journey. Sorry for this metaphor, but hopefully it's useful. Those little momentary bits are defined by what I call audio tracks. And audio tracks basically are a sequence of playing a piece of audio, then waiting a little bit, then playing another piece of audio, and then waiting, and so forth. And the pieces there's basically a playlist, if you will, a collection of recordings that are available at any given time to be played. And that is constantly updated based on the location of the listener and based on various tag selections or filtering selections that people have made. So that kind of playlist exists all the time, and then an audio track will basically grab the top recording off the playlist, and play it whenever it's ready to play something. It fades it up for a little bit of time. You can see here there's fade in happens between 2 and 5 seconds. Then we play for between 30 and 40 seconds, and then we fade out from between 2 and 8 seconds. And then we wait for 2 to 5 seconds, and then we start it all over again. And if there is nothing in the playlist, obviously nothing plays. And that kind of audio tracks as you want. In this case, I only have one, which means that only one piece of audio will play at a time. Obviously, the ambient audio will still play, but only one momentary piece will play at the same time, simultaneously. If I had 2 or 3 of these, I could potentially have more playing on top of each other, which is useful in certain circumstances. So that's kind of how the recordings are played.
Halsey, can I?
And then I can access a list of the recordings here, which is, all the momentary bits. So yes, Hamish, sorry.
Sorry, no, that's fantastic. It's such an exciting choreographed audio experience, and I love what Roundware is doing. I think one of the things which really excites me about Roundware is the ability to move into oral history. And I'm thinking of a project which I can't remember what the name of it is, but I think you were involved with the Smithsonian Institute, and it was an old internment camp during the Second World War, I think, where a number of people were interned. And I believe that you were able to access a range of oral histories that testified to some of those people's experiences. This really gets me excited, because I suppose you've both got that idea of the background audio mix. You've got also then the sort of the fish or the coral sea sort of extracts of audio, and then you've got more deliberately cached within that these historical sort of testaments to what was going on back in the I assume it was the 1940s. Yes, definitely. So this project, despite you have to forgive some of my inappropriately labeled things here. This is a look behind the curtain, and behind the curtain isn't always sometimes a bit messy. But this project, despite it saying Corona Diaries here, is actually the project you're referring to, the data from it. And this project is called 1 Square Mile, and I can show you here. This is a view of this project as well. This is exactly what you're saying. This is a project that takes place physically at the site of a World War II Japanese internment camp, which, for those who are unaware of this horrible part of America's history, it was a situation in the 40s after Pearl Harbor, when the Japanese bombed the U.S. military base there. The government took extreme action, and one of the things that they decided was appropriate to do was to round up all Japanese Americans on the West Coast and force them out of their homes and force them into these camps in very remote locations to attempt to ensure that they weren't behaving traitorously or something like that. And I'm not going to get into the politics of this right now and the application of that to the present day in some ways, but we hope that this project does get into those, does sort of get people to think about this. And I should say this project is a collaboration with a colleague of mine, Sue Ding, who is a filmmaker and a very talented artist. And she and I met at the MIT Open Documentary Lab a few years ago. And basically, the idea is, as you were saying, Hamish, is to take these oral histories. There's been a large number of oral history projects that have happened regarding, capturing the recordings of people who lived on these sites and trying to, archive those for posterity, just so we understand and we remember what happened. A lot of these folks are still alive now. They're quite old. They were children at the time, and they're quite old now. But there's been a lot of effort to capture these. So lots of really, really great voices. And what we thought would be really, really interesting would be to take these voices out of these sort of archival systems, which are very useful for academic purposes and whatnot. But the general public isn't quite as excited to sort of go into a dusty library and pull out a CD that we don't have a CD player anymore to play and sort of access. So we thought, well, how about we just take them out of there and we stick them in the environment that they actually are talking about. And that's what that's what we do here. Here you can see on this map, this is a map of the site. It's called there are multiple of these sites, but the one we were using is called Manzanar, which is outside of LA. It's in the middle of this very sort of desolate, you can see it's a very desolate area. It's
it's quite beautiful, but not if you're locked there against your will. And we basically took these oral histories and kind of chopped them up into small bits and sort of bite-sized chunks and distributed them throughout the site so that people can come and wander around and hear the experiences of folks who were on this,
my home life. I think would be a little different because, as I said, my mom was the way she was, and so
we've got a bit of an error here.
Time too, we didn't have the money, and my job was to make sure that my brothers had enough to eat, and so I'd ask my mom. I said, "Well, I think we need some milk." So she gave me 4 pennies. And I'd go to the corner store, who was run by a Jewish man, and I said, I need some milk, but I can't afford that, so I'll buy Carnation canned milk, this small, and that was 4 cents.
Oh, sorry, I thought I thought we had a glitch there, but you're playing some audio there from one of the oral history recordings. Is that right?
Exactly. Yes, that was one of the, and this is actually still another behind the scenes look here of an unreleased situation, but it's getting there. This is a kind of layout of where all the individual voices are, and how I've laid them out at the visitor center, and how that kind of works. So
and what's your
that's a fun project.
What are your readings on that like in terms of laying that audio on that field, Halsey? Are you taking a big GPS blueprint, or are you making quite small little wee footprints into this area? I mean, how big are those stories in terms of the radius with your GPS footprint on each of those stories? Because it seems like you've got a hell of a lot there.
Yeah, we do, and again, as I showed you before, the sort of audio tracks sort of ensure that there's never like tons of them playing at the same time. So even if you're in a location where a whole bunch exist, you as a listener, you're not going to hear more than 1 or 2 at the same time, which is, I think, important.
So just to get that clear, so you're putting those in there, you're laying those across those maps, but those points that you've got on the map there with those little markers, that's not indicative of where that audio piece is going to come up. That's just saying that there are 50 or 60 audio files that when the right time comes up, one of those will come up to the top. Is that correct?
No, a better way to think about it is that as you're walking around this site, you have a bubble around you, and that bubble is defined by the center point of where you are and then a particular radius. In this case, I think it might be like 15 meters or something like that, so not super precise, but that's an adjustment that you can make in Ramware to sort of decide what you want to do. And so as you're walking, you have this bubble that's kind of moving around you. You're always at the center. And then anytime one of these pins comes within that bubble, it becomes available to be played back. And if nothing else is playing at the time, then that particular one will play. If your bubble happens to encapsulate 4 or 5 of them, it will sequence through those as you go. So that's kind of probably the best way of thinking about it. Another way, conversely, you could think of it as you're walking around and each of these has a circle around them. If you're within that circle, then you're accessible to that one. It's the same kind of thing, though. It's just a simple distance away from a center point of a particular piece of audio. So that's how it works. Thankfully, in this case, we're out in the middle of the desert plains, and GPS is pretty accurate. There's no tall buildings to bounce around and whatnot. So it's a relatively favorable condition for that. And
at the same time, you're also allowing people who are visiting that site to be able to upload their own commentary. Is that correct? Yeah,
that's correct. Yeah, we ask questions about sort of, if they happen to have a personal connection to the site, if they have any stories they want to share about that. Even if they don't have a personal connection, how does it feel to, experience the physicality of this sort of desolate space while hearing, people recounting their childhood experiences, et cetera. And then we also, we ask a question about how this experience might relate to, the own individual's present day experience or our current socio-political, economic situation, et cetera, because, I think we all can learn from history, and it's nice to make those connections. We don't try to, it's very open in the sense of we don't have a particular political agenda or any kind of agenda here other than to expose these experiences in a aesthetically enjoyable way and allow a conversation, an asynchronous conversation of sorts to happen.
It strikes me that the model that you're working with kind of jumps between I guess sort of this audiophonic kind of music creative piece of artwork with the algorithm that can bring up audio and that creates this normal sort of this kind of underlying sound bed. But then on the other side, there's this idea that you're almost giving voice to places with the way in which you've engineered this means that the place will just kind of give forth a range of different voices and a range of different experiences that will be different to anyone who's walking around that site. So each time someone goes in, depending on where sort of the algorithm's kind of at, they'll get a different storied experience than the next person would come in. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Depending on where the sort of behaviors of the random parameters in the algorithm, and of course, how they choose to walk through the space. If you walk along the exact same path 3 times, you're not going to get the same exact experience in most cases. Unless it's very sparsely populated, but yeah, you have the ability to sort of control to a large degree what you're interested in, and which parts. Down here is the cemetery, and some people might be interested in sort of exploring what happens, at the cemetery. You saw before. This map doesn't show all the pins at the same time, but before there's a whole cluster here. This is where the hospital was. There were a lot of interviews with hospital workers, so. You could dive into that if you wanted to, et cetera, et cetera. So it's, but yes, you're correct. It's a indeterminate experience. Although I would argue that the sort of overall experience that people will sort of walk away with at the end is quite consistent in the sense of getting a feel for the fact that these individuals did live here, were forced to be here, and underwent their own individual experiences, but collectively it was there's a collective experience, I think, which we hope to convey in this experience.
Halsey, I think I'm mindful of time, and I'd just like to finish off with one question, which really takes us into the future here. In terms of the role of audio, and I guess I'm using the word crafted audio here because I think this is very crafted, even though it might be different than something that was more highly, self-consciously produced to be in one spot. This is crafted through the algorithm that you're using. Mm-hmm. What sort of role do you think that audio is going to play as we continually sort of step into a more moderated and spatially tracked experience with AR?
Yeah, well, in your intro, you referred to your feelings of the importance of audio in these sort of future parts of our lives that everybody keeps on talking about and haven't quite arrived yet in a lot of ways. And I completely agree with that sentiment. I think audio is going to be incredibly important. I think that the ability that audio has to really immerse you is extremely useful. We can hear all around us all the time, and I think audio has that ability to immerse. I think once directional audio is perfected, the hardware for that with AirPods Pro are apparently pretty good with that nowadays. But once people have the tools to build really precise sort of location, not just location-based, but also directional audio, and the ability to pinpoint things in space, sound objects, is going to increase realism of these augmentations in amazing ways. And to me, one of the really important things is simply the fact that when you're walking around the world, it's very nice to not have to have your phone in front of you with your screen looking at it to see, to see visual augmentations. I feel that that's a safety issue in addition to simply being this sort of cumbersome thing. But walking around, as I always say with Ramware, press play and put the phone in your pocket. And and then you walk and things just sort of wash over you, and your experience is augmented in this sort of way, and you're not pulled away, I don't think, as much from. I think you're actually pulled into, if it's done right, you're pulled into the visual things you see, the sights and the sounds and the smells of the real world are kind of enhanced, I think, by these augmentations, if done right. And it can increase the sort of desire to explore and the desire to maybe go places you haven't gone before physically. And I think that's really, really exciting. So yeah, when Apple's AR glasses are released, if they ever are, when who knows about Magic Leap, all these companies are sort of building these spatial engines. Amazon is, Niantic is, of course, with Pokemon Go and all that. And I think it's super exciting. I think that the focus has really been much more on visual thus far, but I do think that audio will play a really big role. But I don't think anybody's cracked it yet. And I'm hoping that the work that folks like yourself and me and so many others are doing will be interesting use cases and examples for the future.
And it's such an area for scholarship and study, and there's so many aspects that you could zero in and talk. I mean, you could just talk. You could talk for an hour on just maps and the history of maps and what maps are doing and whether or not they're relevant anymore. There's so many aspects.
Who made the map and what perspective the map has? Even though it pretends to be perspectiveless. It's
yes.
Usually not. Yes.
Yes. Okay, look, I think we've probably got to wrap it up there because I'm mindful that we're trying to kind of stick to around 45 minutes for these conversations. But thank you so much for talking with me today. We've been in conversation with Halsey Burgund, again, who's a fellow at MIT Open Documentary Labs. Check out Roundware, take it for a spin. It's a fantastic app. And also check out Soundtrails as well. We're running a number of conversations over September in coordination with Soundwalks September. So this is celebrating mobile Soundwalks all around the world. Thank you very much for joining us today, and feel free to share this with your friends. Okay, thank you very much, Halsey.
Thank you so much, Hamish. Great to be here, and thank you everybody for tuning in.